has been pressed. Here. Bum, bum, bum. It's Friday. Are you ready for Friday? I'm super ready.
You know, I used to love Mondays because it was the day I would get back to work.
Right.
Are we? Please tell me we're live.
But
we are live.
But now
we are live. So that's interesting that you were excited about Mondays because that's the day you went back to work.
Uh-huh.
So what? Tell us about that, and then we'll do the intro because that's already got me interested.
So, well, here's the thing. I later on found out that, like, statistically, people are more likely to have heart attacks on Monday. So, yeah. Apparently, it has something to do with going back to work. But no, I mean, I loved, and I still love making games so much that, you know, after the weekend, I'd feel refreshed, and I'm like, I got to get back in here and do something that I've been thinking about all weekend. So it was just super exciting to be able to do something that I've been thinking about all weekend and, you know, just get down to it. But
yeah, but so hold on, do the intro real quick.
All right. You want me to do the intro? Or you want to do the intro this time?
Oh, well, yeah, but I can't do the whose side I'm on because, you know, at this point, I'm just going to assume people know who we are. That's Indy. I'm Jay, and we've got Peter Kojesta with us. I got your name right. That's awesome.
Yeah. And welcome to Indie Game Business.
Yes, and today is going to be fun because we're going to be talking about all the shit they never tell you about in game development. And so Peter and I were talking earlier this week, or was it last week, and we just started riffing on all of this stuff because we've both been doing this for 20 years now. And I was like, oh my God, this will make a great episode. So we literally have a list of shit that we can go through. And yeah, dude, let's just dive on in. So if you are out there on Facebook or LinkedIn or Twitter or YouTube or Twitch and you want to chime in because we got you. We'll see your comments pop up on our handy dandy restream thing and we will absolutely talk about it. But first, our first question always, Peter, tell us how you got into the industry and then give us like a quick walkthrough of your last 20 years and what you've been doing.
Oof, yeah, that's a small topic. So it started for me when I was 12. My friend Tom, he came over with this notebook and he's like, I'm working on Final Fantasy 3. And he made it sound super official. And, you know, me being a 12-year-old, I'm like, oh man, I want to work on Final Fantasy 3. And so we're just basically writing ideas down in a notebook. And Tom eventually became a lawyer for one of these giant pharmaceutical companies. And me being the stupid one, continued to work in game development.
Welcome to the club.
Yeah. So I got my first contract when I was 17 on this game. I think it was called like Cthulhu Rising or something like that. So I started in the industry doing contract work, and this is, you know, the late 90s. I want to say like 98, somewhere around there. And then I got my first in-studio job in the early 2000s, working at a studio on the East Coast, making serious games and stuff like that. Since then, and working at that studio was actually really good for me, and it taught me a really important lesson right from the get-go, and I'll get to that in a second. But when I left that studio, about a year or two later, I started doing contract work again. And instead of just doing it as a consultant or as, you know, a one-man team, you know, I started getting people together with me in order to take on bigger projects. Since then, I've worked on XCOM 2, Civilization 4, 5, Fracture, Fear 3,
Jesus,
World of
you are
Tanks.
responsible for about a year of my lost life at that point. I mean, all right, anyway, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I enjoyed working on BioShock Infinite, Ashes of the Singularity, and the cool thing is I got to work on a lot of projects with Sid Meier. So he put out like a string of mobile titles. I got to work on those. That was a lot of fun. But cool. Yeah, XCOM was probably my favorite project to work on because it was the first PC game that I fell in love with. as a player. So then, getting to work on it years later, I felt like I'd come full circle, and it felt amazing.
So wait, did you work on the first XCOM or like the recent re-release XCOM?
XCOM Enemy Unknown that Firaxis put out, I think in 2012. Yeah.
I never actually completed the story, but I restarted it. I don't know how many times because I'm like, I can build a better base. I can recruit people that are better. And I've got hundreds of hours in it, and I've never actually finished it.
Yeah, you and me both.
Yeah. All right, so let's dive into like one of the first ones on here. We can talk about that. I don't even want to do the starting a business one yet. So let's talk about all the shit that they don't tell you about making your first game.
Right. So.
Right.
That's a heavy one. So a lot of it comes down to when you're deciding to make the game, right? If you have the experience to know that you should not start with a big game, you're already way ahead of the game, so to speak. When my first thing that I tried to do by myself was an MMO, and this was before EverQuest had even come out. So I'm hitting like top-notch levels of stupid over here. So you really want to start with a small project, and you're not necessarily going to release the first thing you work on either. A lot of people have taken to like getting these like Unity templates now, and they'll put it up on a store somewhere and sell it just by changing a couple assets. And I hate that.
Asset flips.
Yeah, they're just adding to the noise. So it's making it harder for everybody when people do that. But the biggest thing to realize is that you're going to need money to make games. And if you want to make real games that have a chance of being played by a wide audience, chances are you're going to need some funding in order to get it done. And there's just a million hard truths about getting funding and what your game is and where your game's going to end up that people just aren't aware of when they start thinking of getting into the games industry as an independent developer themselves. Getting a job is a whole nother ball of wax.
So, all right, I've got a question. I understand the angst about asset flips. Mm-hmm. People have gone and basically bought the assets and they threw together something crappy and they put it out. Is there an argument to be made, though, for those being a good way to learn to get a first project out, though?
It's a great way to learn. I don't know that. And I think I need to qualify this a little bit, right? I'm not talking about you get like buy some crates or you buy an environment pack so you can have trees in your, like, that's perfectly fine. If nobody needs to make another potted plant 3D model for their game. Like being an outsourced studio, I've made the same potted plant every couple years and we just crank up the polygons a little bit and, make the texture a little higher. So I'm not talking about that kind of stuff. What I'm saying is like people who take those templates and basically just change the main character, and it's always the same little side scroller type game. They change the main character from like green to red and then they put it up on Google Play and they're like, I've released a product. That I can't approve of that very much, but in terms of learning how to make a game, I'm so thankful that any of these engines and templates even exist today, because they weren't around when I started. You had to code your engine from scratch every time.
I know, and remember going back to those years in Atlanta, and then when E3 moved over to LA, that used to be a very real thing. It's like, okay, I'm either going to use whatever engine was out there at the time, or I'm going to make my own engine. And you didn't get a sideways look from somebody if you said, we're building our own engine.
Right.
Now, when somebody comes to you and, I ask, okay, what's the technology? Is it Unreal or Unity? Because that's generally what it is. Then there's, a couple of smaller ones in the background. When someone says, oh, we're building our own engine, it's like my cuckoo alarms start going off.
Yeah.
Because is there any reason to really be building your own engine anymore?
Yes, there definitely is. And
okay.
I'll tell you why. if you want to get noticed by a Microsoft or a Sony or one of the hardware manufacturers or even a larger publisher, having your own technology immediately puts you above all of the Unreal houses or Unity houses. I love those engines to death. I use them both. I would never approach making my own engine. But I've had friends in the industry who have built their own engine, and they use that as a basis to get their studio funded. So it's possible, but you need to understand that making your own engine is such a monumental undertaking that I wouldn't recommend it unless you already have funding and a pretty decent team of engineers from the get-go.
And you need to have done games before.
Oh yeah. This is not I just popped out of college, let me make an engine. No, just don't.
See that, and those are the ones that I'm generally referring to, because those are the ones that pop up and they're like, yeah, we decided to build our own. It's like, well, what other games have you done? Well, none. We're just building our own engine. It's like, no.
Yeah, they'll learn the hard way. I mean, the reason I can say that is because I learned everything the hard way. Because there was no podcasts, when I'm coming up. So for me, it's punch at this mountain for a million years until you make a tunnel. I never thought about going around it. So,
or using a tool to actually punch through the mountain.
A tool, I had to make my own tools. I'm like a caveman over here. But I mean, there's just so many resources like your podcast and others that if people are smart, they'll listen and they'll have success a lot sooner than they would otherwise.
So, what did you learn? What are some of the things that nobody tells you about pitching that first game? So let's say, hypothetically, you've got your studio together, and like I said, we're glossing over the fact that you actually have to have a legal company, and it's right. Not that expensive. And we've talked about this in the past on the show, but you got a company, you got a studio, and now I'm going to run out and I'm going to approach all these publishers. So what do they don't? What do they not tell you? What's the trap that's sitting in there waiting for you?
So there's a lot. This is a really big subject, right? Because this is basically where the metal meets the rubber meets the road. You're not just pitching your game, you're pitching your team and your company. And most people think if I have this great game idea, then that'll be enough. And it most certainly 100% is not enough. One of the really trickiest parts of the whole pitching process is your demo. Because, and this one is so hard, this part right here is so hard to navigate. You have to have a demo. Get it out of your mind that you're going to get funded or, get a publisher without a demo. So that's just a given, right? But if you make your demo too good, you're also not going to get a publisher. Because what will happen is they'll look at your art.
Explain that.
Yeah. They'll look at your art, they'll look at the mechanics, and instead of looking at it as a demo, they'll be like, well, why isn't it as good as this AAA game? And you can throw your hands up and say, well, it's a demo. I'm just trying to show you what it's going to be like. In the back of their mind, they're going to be comparing it with all these higher level things. And they're going to start to all the things you're missing are going to be these giant glaring errors in their mind. So it makes it harder to get a funding deal if your demo is too good. And it makes it harder to get funded if your demo is too bad. So
don't be good or bad.
Yeah, be mediocre.
just be average. That's all you got to do.
So it's mostly a visual thing too, right? Like if your visuals are really good, they'll expect the mechanics to be good. But I don't know. I think you just got to be careful about taking it too far. Even with like a vertical slice, they say you're supposed to get, one piece of the game looking as good and polished as possible. In my experience, that's kind of hurt in the past a little bit because they expect it to be done.
Right. You know what? That is such one of the things that I hate so much is when you look at a game and it's like, man, this looks fucking awesome. And then you start playing it. It's like, this feels terrible. God, you spend so much time into the looks of things and then the mechanics are just terrible. That really turns me off. But I digress.
And the other thing, actually, Jay and I talked about this last week, is that you need to be really careful about who's calling themselves a publisher.
Oh,
So I've kind of coined this term, the publisher, the faux publisher, where they don't fund your game and they don't spend anything on marketing, but they'll claim that they market and promote your game and they'll take a third of the revenues. That's not a publisher. That's a PR company that's working on, promise of a back end. And if you have to pay anyone to publish your game, you're just not doing it right.
If you pay anybody up front, yeah. Exactly.
Up front, yeah.
That's never an option. The other thing when it comes to pitching the publisher that nobody tells you, or it's not that no one tells you, it's just like a lot of people tell you the wrong shit, is you've got to, they're like, oh, well, we don't need to worry about the graphics because it's all about the core game loop. And bullshit.
No, that's not true at all.
Yeah. You've got to have something pretty. And that's basically,
it's not too pretty.
Yeah, that's the
it's got to be pretty and it's got to feel good.
Make your animations walk with a limp or something. It's but if you make it too basic, and then everybody's going to look at it, they're going to take 2 seconds to look at it on a video, and they're going to be like, oh no, this looks shit, we're not going to do this one. Right. So where do you find that line between, okay, it's good enough not to look like a bunch of 8-year-olds created it, but it's not so good that I'm going to get nitpicked on a bunch of other stuff.
Yeah. And so that's where the artistry comes in, right? Walking that fine line. I'll tell you this, like my background is as a 3D artist. If your animations look really, really good, that'll excuse a mediocre 3D model to some degree. So if your animations and visual effects are fantastic, that'll actually make people think the game looks a lot better than it does. So if you're an indie developer and you're looking to make your demo, I would focus on making sure those things are really nice. If it feels good and it moves well, then you're going to stand a much higher chance of someone finding it interesting.
And on the other spectrum, if you have amazing looking models but the animation sucks, that's bad as well.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of people using the Paragon assets, and they don't think about what I call the connective tissue. It's the things that link everything in the game together. If your character is moving and then suddenly they turn like this and now they're going that way, that's an indicator to anyone who understands how games are made that this is not a quality product. They're not thinking about the nuances and the things that connect the game together that make it enjoyable, the things that people subconsciously expect to see in a game. Cover those bases.
And so if you're out there watching us live on Mixer or Facebook or YouTube, or I don't think, and now today, Andy, I don't think we're live on LinkedIn.
I don't see it on LinkedIn. That's a bummer.
Some days we're on LinkedIn, some days we're not. We have no idea and no way of
just
figuring it out.
Post the Anchor FM link on LinkedIn when it goes up.
Yeah, anyway, whatever. Anyway, if you've got questions or you've got thoughts or you've got experience in this stuff too, throw it up in chat. So, we're going to make this as interactive as humanly possible. So I'm just going to kind of going through these in like chronological order versus the order that we have in this list.
Sure.
Once you've found a real publisher, what are some of the things that you need to be aware of on the contract phase that aren't the normal things that come out?
So this is where you need to put the majority of your attention, is the legal and the business aspect of your game studio. One of the things a lot of people don't know about, which blows my mind, is the difference between gross and net revenue. Like if someone is getting paid on your gross, they're part of your expenses. If someone is getting paid on your net, they're your partner, basically. So you need to understand the difference between gross and net. Gross is the money you bring in from your project before, you got to pay everybody out. So that's like your sales right there.
Yep.
So someone getting paid from those two different things is a completely different amount of money. So that's one thing to be aware of, and just look at it in the contract and see who's getting paid where.
And what it is too, because that's one of the things that we always talk about, because net receipts is the section of the contract that you're looking for, because your royalty or your rev share is always going to be a percentage of net receipts. But then you got to go back through the contract to that first page or two where all the definitions are and find out what is net receipts. And you'll have publishers that say marketing expenses. And it's like, okay, one, no, but two, what are you counting as a marketing expense? I've had publishers try to, factor in their flights to E3 as a marketing expense. And it's just like, no, that's not a marketing expense. These are things that are going to be deducted. They have to be defined, and you have to have a way of checking it. Because in the, rare but not unheard of instance of you having to call an audit or go and sue your publisher, if you've got something in there that's completely non-defined, then, no one's going to be able to figure out if they were right or not. So you always got to make sure that what is being taken out for net receipts is something that is, realistic.
So a few things. Them going to E3 is a cost of doing business for them. That's not your responsibility. So if they're trying to take that from you, then that's improper and should be removed. The other thing to keep in mind, so I've got something going on with my throat, man. I'm telling you, there's a lot of pollen in the air or whatever.
It's a beard hair.
Over here, it's like 20 degrees outside. We ain't got a pollen problem. That's not the issue.
I tell you, that's why I moved to California, man. The cold, it just got to me. 20 years of freezing temperatures all the time. I was like, nope, my fingers are solid now. I just can't do it anymore.
I'm done. I'm absolutely done.
So what were we talking about? The publishers trying to get marketing.
Stuff the contract crap.
Yeah. So the other thing that I loathe is a turnaround clause. And I actually ran into this with one of these publishers. Like I said, I learned everything the hard way. So I actually signed with one of the publishers for one of my early game projects. And they'd set it up so that if I wanted to get my rights back, I would have to pay them $100,000. And they never paid me $100,000 for those rights to begin with. So they were basically saying, if you ever want, you get to keep your IP, but if you actually ever want to use your IP, you need to pay us $100,000. So if you see anything like a turnaround clause, just say no. It's not going to happen unless unless you've proven that you've spent X amount of money marketing this and doing that, approved marketing expenses. Then I'm not paying you anything in order to get my IP back. If you fail to do your job, you don't release the game, IP reverts to me. So I think that's a real critical one. And then the whole idea, the whole notion of IP is a big deal that I think people think they can get cute when it comes to dealing with IP, but they don't realize it's probably the single biggest indicator of your long-term success is whether you own IP or not. And if you think you're just going to make up an IP, you're going to make a problem signing it away, if it's easy to give your IP to a publisher, it means that it's crap and they're probably not going to want it. And if it's good enough for them to want it, you're probably going to want to keep it. So you need to really make that decision between you and your partners is whether are we going to do something where we keep the IP, or are we okay with essentially working for someone else, coming up with something and letting someone exploit it from there on out just because they're willing to fund it.
The good news is it's a lot easier to retain IP now than it used to be 10 or 15 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you could give it up, 10 years ago. I mean, if you were going to take any money at all from a publisher up front, they were going to own your IP, end of discussion, done. But now it's actually a lot easier to not do that. And it could be the fact that, there's 650 some publishers out there, and there is a little bit of competition here and there, but it's still something you got to be careful of. But Indy,
let's hit a question. We have a question from Asking Bag on Mixer. What are your thoughts on mega grants, and at what level of quality should be the sweet spot?
Are you guys asking me?
Asking you.
I love Epic. I think Epic is I think they're killing it. Between the mega grants and putting up some competition for Steam, these guys are just killing it. The mega grants themselves it blows my mind that a company is willing to do something like this. I'd approach it with, the seriousness that you would approach any significant funding source. These are smart people. They know the games industry in and out. If you're doing something that's interesting, innovative, something beautiful, something that, tells a meaningful story, go for it, man. Apply. Get it to a nice, decent state and apply. Because I can't think of any company that's really doing something as beautiful as saying, we will fund creativity simply because it's an important part of our ecosystem to do so. I think it's fantastic. Go for it.
All right, so Kindred Dev on Twitch has a good comment. He's like, I wish they were faster at responding, though. I've been waiting nearly 6 months. This is the caveat that goes along with these grants. And it's not just the Epic Mega Grant. It's like any kind of grant or fund. Right. You can't rely on that as your sole basis of revenue, because it's like hitting the lottery, basically, except you have to apply it to hit it. Yeah. If you get it, it's fantastic, but you absolutely cannot sit back and go, my business plan is that I'm going to, get the Epic Mega Grant, because it's the same thing we saw 10 years ago. And I literally had this conversation at E3 with a developer, and I'm looking at his game they had it on an iPad, and I'm like, this is great. What's your business plan? He goes, oh, well, Apple's going to feature me. I'm like, oh, so this is back when Apple featuring you was actually a good thing and beneficial. But I was like, oh, so you've got you've got a good contact. No, I haven't talked to anybody over there yet, but I think I know somebody, and they're gonna feature it. Like, okay, and it's one of those things that me doing what I do, I was just like, it's not worth me standing here and talking to this person, because that is so far out in right field that it's not even gonna matter.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's not a business plan. It is essentially just buying a lottery ticket and hoping to win. So
it's very much one of those things where, yes, you should apply to it, but you also you've got to keep in mind that there's more to it than just your game. It's got to be something above and beyond, either from the creative aspect or from a impact in society or something like that. Look at the people who won it last year. Mm-hmm. And that's a good, because we had a developer we were talking to recently, and they had a mobile game, and I'm like, we can apply, but you got to keep in mind that no mobile game won one last year. So where does that put it? Uh-huh. All right. So can you make an erotic game? There's a question for us.
Yeah, I just said go ahead and check out the game House Party.
So, all right, but the downside of it, I mean, yes, you can. There is a publisher called Nutaku, I believe, who does, I mean, they're like the go
to Japan. You can make an erotic game there.
But there are downsides. You've got a big untapped market out there, but at the same time, you're not going to be able to play it on Twitch. I mean, because we can't play House Party on Twitch.
Nope.
There's going to be downsides of it that you got to keep in mind while you're building this. There's the upside of an untapped market. Was not really untapped, but a very popular niche. But you're not going to be able to, promote it in the ways that these games are generally promoted.
It's exactly the same as like the adult film industry. If you think you're gonna, spend 10 years making porn and then suddenly you're gonna end up in a Marvel flick. I mean, here's the thing. I don't have a problem with any of that stuff. Like, make what you want to make. It's just you need to understand that there are people out there who will look at you a certain way for doing that. And a lot of these people act as gatekeepers into the more mainstream stuff. So if you want to make an erotic game, you can. A lot of people are going to buy it from you. And if it's what you're interested in, go for it. But you do need to realize that the choices you make have repercussions in the kind of business you can do later on.
So do a spin-off business and put it under that. All right, and that brings us to another one of the things that we.
Oh, by the way, hold on, Jay. I got to say, I've considered it before, so I'm not saying that like this is something you shouldn't pursue. My company's called Exist, but my wife and we were like, maybe we should start Schmexis Entertainment and release like a whole series of adult products under Schmexis.
That's funny. I always said, because like Twitch has the restrictions, I said they should just make it like an adult version of Twitch, but then just call it Twatch.
Oh, that's fantastic.
So I mean, that is a segue into, because in some ways it is. All right, so let's say hypothetically we're going out there and we're making erotic games. The one side of it is you can get a good reputation in the fact that you make quality erotic games, but the bad side is if you're doing it under that same name as your company, you're not really going to be able to use any of that as work that you've done in the past to get a deal, because you fall right back into the, wait, hold on a second, they make porn games, we're not going to have them making our game.
And this is one of the biggest problems actually in the industry, and I've run into this so many times on a micro and macro level, right? People think you can only do what you've already done. So a publisher will, you come to them and you've spent your whole life making erotic games, and you say, well, I want to make real-time strategy game. They're like, so you've just made porn games up until now. You can't do this. And to me, it baffles my mind, because you've got a room full of creative, like artists and engineers solving hundreds of problems every day, but somehow they can only solve problems in the erotic game space, or in the real-time strategy space.
It doesn't make sense.
All you have to do really is become fluent in the language of the particular genre that you're going into, and the rest of it, you can solve those problems. So I really hate this idea that you can only do what you've done before, because it's this nonsense circle. And that's one of those things that like a publisher will in your face, or a funding source, well, you haven't done this before. It's like, well, okay, but I know how to make games.
It's the same skill set, just a different genre.
Yeah, that's right.
Publishers are always going to look to eliminate every little piece of risk they can come up with.
Yep.
And one of those pieces of risks is always the fact that, well, we want you to do a real-time strategy game, but you've always done shooters. Mm-hmm. And it is one of those things, but you can get around it a little bit when you're putting in that proposal, because whenever you have one of these projects, you'll have an RFP and you'll be submitting a proposal based on, whatever it is the publisher wanted. But if you address that and say, look, I know you want a RTS, but we've made first-person shooters, but this is exactly why we can make a good RTS, you can get around it to a certain extent. But it is one of those like little bullshit stigmas that's in the industry, where no one's going to hire you to do something that you haven't already done. And it's like, if I'm a contract developer, how am I ever going to do something if no one ever hires me to do it?
Right. And the idea of risk is, I don't necessarily fault anyone for trying to mitigate risk. Because one of the pieces of advice I'll give any indie developer is, for the love of God, do not borrow money from your parents and don't go into debt to make your game. Because that's risk you don't want. Most games, and I mean your game and my game and everyone you've ever met, they're fail. You're not going to make your money back. So you really need to be aware that going into debt or taking on a massive amount of personal risk in your life is just not a good idea when it comes to this.
But I lost you. Did you? Oh, you were done. I thought you.
I thought he froze.
I was like, oh my God, we just lost him.
If I stand perfectly still, nobody.
I have mastered.
My emotions are imperceptible.
So all of this, and this comes back to another thing that we were talking about with the outsourcing contracting world, and that trap for indies, and I call it the hamster wheel or the treadmill, because there's so many studios out there that are like, well, we're making our original IP, but we're doing contract work, on the side, and there's some studios that can pull that off, but there are a lot, and I owned one of those studios that fail trying to make the jump from one to another. So what are some of the things, and I'm cheating, so I'm just going to read this. Let's talk about how you often get stuck with the noob, managing the brand new producer, even when, you've got 10 plus years of experience.
So you have
that happen?
Years of developers, right? You've got the EAs of the world that have this giant outsource infrastructure already built, and so you'll have to go through signing up on certain platforms that they have made. Those guys, they have proper outsource managers, right? And then you'll deal with a class of developer that just hired somebody out of college or someone who had a decent portfolio but no experience, and they'll make that person the outsource manager or the art manager for the project. And you end up working with someone who's often very young, very inexperienced, and they need to prove themselves, right? Because they just got their first job in the industry as an outsource manager, or they went from being a junior artist somewhere to being an outsource manager, and they will nitpick everything you do to death. And you really need to be aware of that when working with a lot of these kind of developers, is that if you're not very concise in your contract about what constitutes rework or additional work or something like that, you're going to end up, they'll say, I want A, B, and C, but by the time you're done, you'll have written 3 novels. So, so you need to be very, very careful about that. And then there's just the mental toll it takes on you. I've been doing this for 20 years, and it's, I'm not trying to be ageist or whatever it is, but like sitting there and listening to an 18 or 19-year-old tell me, no, this is the way things are done. I'm like, Tommy, no, this is the way things this is like, all you can do is breathe out angrily. Because
anytime you get a new producer or it's not even the producer, somebody higher up the food chain in that company that comes in the middle of your project, just be ready for a shitstorm, because it's everybody does this. And when you change jobs or you're new to something, you always have to prove yourself. And that is horrible when you're on the development side of it, because now, you're going to have to go back and justify everything you've been doing for the last 6 months on this project, and you're going to have to re-explain it. And this new person, whether they're the producer or whoever it is going to absolutely want to put stamps on things to ensure that they're being seen by their bosses as somebody who's being effective. The other thing is, if you have turnover in management.
Oh, there we go.
There we go.
I lost you for a second.
Twitch died. Sorry. If you've got turnovers in management or something along those lines, higher up the food chain, then there's a good chance your project's going to get canceled, and that's just the reality of it. Whenever we see major management changes, or the publisher you were working with gets bought by somebody else, or they turn around and they've done, a merger, anytime that happens, there's a very strong chance that they're going to look at your project, no matter how good it was going, and go, oh, well, that's not what we want to do going forward, so we're just going to kill it.
Yeah, they need to put their scent on it, and that's happens no matter what. I'll tell you, I was working with a larger developer, a well-known developer, and we put out the original product that I was working on with them, and everything went fantastic. I'd been working with them for years, and when it came time to do the expansion, they hired a new outsource manager, and they assigned them to handle the expansion. So they come to us for the outsource stuff. And, I'm having a really hard time with this guy. Everything I want to do, no, do this, do that, do it this way, do it that way. And it eventually got to the point where he sent me these 3D models. He's like, listen, can you just make it look like this damn guy's work? I'm sick of having to tell you how to do everything. And I emailed him back, and I was like, I would love to make it look like that guy's work, because that guy's work is me. You just sent me my own models from the original version of the game. And if you would just let me work, I would be more than happy to give you that quality. But when you're holding my hand and moving it around like this, you're going to get the quality that you are going to get from moving my hand around like this. So, like, you need to be aware that when someone new comes in, your world is going to get flipped upside down as an external developer. And that's either something you get used to, or you're probably not going to, survive very long as an external dev.
It's funny because it's not funny.
Yeah, it's hard, right? When someone sends you your own work and they're like, make it as good as this, and you're like, I'd love to, no problem.
Just shut up and let me work.
And you can't be rude. I mean, the thing is, you don't want to be rude, right? You want to enjoy what you're working on.
There's sometimes you want to be rude. There's
Well, I'm trying to be diplomatic. But the whole outsource, being an outsource team while you're working on your own game it's a huge trap. I'm in that trap. We're working on 2 original IPs right now for ourselves, but we're also working on projects for some large developers right now. And the thing you don't realize is that to some degree, outsource has become very commoditized. So if you're just now getting into it, you're going to be fighting against, people in Singapore, China, India, Eastern Europe, and that kind of stuff. And they're doing anywhere between 180 to 250 a man day in Asia. So you're not going to be able to make a living on that. And you're certainly not going to be able to fund a studio or any high quality project while you're trying to do their work for 10 hours a day and then your own thing for a couple hours a day. You're going to burn out. And burnout is awful. People say, oh, I'm burned out when they're just a little tired. No, burnout is when, here's the thing. I came up with this saying, you can't burn ashes. And that's the thing. You get to a point where you're just like a pile of ashes. And then, there's nowhere to go from there. And you don't want to end up there because it's physically and mentally demanding. And it's awful. You need to take care of yourself. So you really got to be careful trying to juggle 2 giant projects, the client's project and your own. So it's a tough one.
True burnout, because you hear it a lot. It's like, I'm burned out, true burnout is on there with depression, like clinical depression, not like I'm sad, like I don't want to get out of bed. I can't stand going to work. This is absolute horrible. That is real burnout. And that's the thing that you have to be so careful of. And if you're managing a studio, you have to really be looking at your team members and identifying those, warning signs beforehand. One of the things, and this goes back to getting a studio, if you're trying to get into the industry and you're applying to jobs, and when you tour the studio, they're sitting there going, oh, and here's our kitchen and here's our game room. That means they want
here's the beds where you get to sleep when you don't go home for 3 months. That's
not like, oh my God, that's so cool. That's like, that's warning sign number 1 that your work-life balance is about to get thrown to shit. It's the reason they have a kitchen there is because they want you eating there. That's one of those things that you have to be careful of. And it's, we talk about the burnout in the industry, and we talk about, the ageism thing that yes, we can sit back and go, this is very much a thing, because the reason I have a consulting company right now is because 10 years ago, I would get passed over for jobs, despite the fact that I had a decade of experience in this, by somebody coming straight out of college. It's a very real thing. And if you're that person coming out of college, don't have that mentality of, I'll do whatever I can do to get a job. I'll work whatever, because you're digging your own pit and you don't realize it yet.
Well, I've got a gripe about those game schools to begin with, and you and I chatted about that a little bit too.
Yes. Do you want to start, or do you want me to?
Oh, go for it, baby. Go for it.
You are not going to go to a college and get a piece of paper that says you're a game designer and then get a job as a game designer. I don't
It's
give a
not
shit.
an entry-level job.
It's not. It's there's no amount of prep work that they can get you to do in a college that you're going to walk out and apply for game design positions at these studios, and they're going to go, oh yeah, well, you know, he hasn't designed a game before, but he has a piece of paper saying he can do it. It's bullshit. There's a lot of, we're seeing more and more colleges and universities that are, you know, running game dev tracks, and I'm on the board of one of them. I know it. You have to use a little bit of common sense when you go into this. There are things that can be taught. You know, I've seen really good entry-level producers come out of some of these studios. I've seen, you know, coders and artists come out of it. You're not going to be a designer. Get it out of your head. The only way you're going to get a design gig is by designing a game. That's it.
No.
You know, and so you've got to, this is not that industry where it's like, oh yeah. You know, you have a degree from college, that's going to give you a leg up. No, you spent 4 years getting a degree, which is not completely worthless. I'm not going to say that. But here's this other person who spent 4 years putting out a portfolio. That person's going to get the job.
Right.
Because they can already show the work.
I used my comp sci degree to actually negotiate a better when I worked at my first studio. So it's not like the piece of paper is utterly worthless, like you said, but I really favor someone getting a degree in a more traditional field, like computer science or information systems or something like that. If you have a hard skill, then you're going to be much better off in this industry than like, I'm an idea guy. But like, there's no idea guy. The idea guy is
everybody is an idea guy.
Yeah, everyone's an idea guy and nobody gets that job. So like, you know, if you're starting your own company, you're the idea guy, but nobody's going to pay you for that until you have a demo and you pitch and you have a track record and, you know, your mother's brother's uncle works for Sean Penn and has $400 billion saved up and is willing to invest in you. Like, this is the way it works. Like, if you want to be the idea guy.
Oh my God. The thing to keep in mind too, with, you know, when we're talking about a college degree, is getting a regular college degree is also going to be helpful when you get burned out and you realize that this is not what you want to do for the rest of your life and you want to go get a real job. You know, that's where it's going to factor in as well. But, you know, and I tell teachers and instructors this when I come, you know, talk to schools and things like that. I'm like, don't expect me to be the guy that's going to come in and say, yeah, you got to get good grades and go to college and get a degree, because you don't. You know, you have to be able to show you're capable of doing the job. Now, if that job that you want in the industry is a data analyst, which is a huge job and a very well-paying job in the industry, yeah, you're going to need a degree. You're going to need something that shows I know how to use Excel, you know. But otherwise, you know, art, programming, even design. You know, I know a designer who came out, you know, a friend of mine who's designed a lot of great games. Do you know where we hired him? He was working the desk at GameStop. And we brought him in as a tester back in the day. You know, 3 months later, he was a producer. You know, speaking of the junior producers to get thrown on all the outsourced projects. But he was a fantastic producer. He, you know, went on and designed several, you know, well-done games, but he didn't have a degree in game design. I don't know if he had a degree at all, quite frankly. But we found him working retail at GameStop.
Portfolio over pedigree every time. Yes. That's just that simple. Yeah, without a doubt. If your portfolio is good and you have a degree in game development, that's great. I love it. If all you have is a piece of paper and a crappy portfolio, you're still not getting hired. Sorry.
Or you might, but you're going to be in QA.
And so here's the thing about that. You know, I said my background is as an artist, right? I know how to code, or I did know how to code when I came out of college. I haven't done it in a while. But the path to management, like getting into the upper echelons of the industry, you're either going to want to go through programming or through the production track, because it's rare that artists end up running companies. I've rarely seen it. And this is something that rarely ever
seen it, and it didn't go well. But it happens. But yeah,
sure, it happens. Like, I remember at the one studio I worked at, they actually had the programmers sitting on a mezzanine above the programmers so that they could physically look down on us. Yeah.
What?
Yeah, it's you get a lot of that. Like, a programmer in the game industry will always find a job, an artist not necessarily. So that's something to keep in mind.
Well, try being the business guy, because your studio may need 4 programmers and 3 artists and 2 designers, but you only need 1 business guy. And so that's the downside of getting into this side of the industry.
Here's a question from Asking Bag, if you want to talk about that before we change subjects. Asking Bag says, what about a photographer doing lighting who knows that side of Unreal and Unity? I think those are good skill sets.
You can get a job as a lighting artist at a studio. I mean, when I was working on Fear 3, they were looking for lighting artists. And
like a real life skill set with the skill set in those 2 game engines. I think that's good. That shows real experience.
For sure, definitely.
So this is one of those things that we had talked about what's changed in the last 20 years. 15 years ago, would you have been looking for a lighting artist?
Oh no,
you were looking for
15 years ago. You were the producer, programmer, artist, biz dev guy, marketing person, intern.
But everything has gotten so specific now. It's like, I'm not an artist, because that's how we used to frame it out. It's like, okay, you have a designer, you have 4 programmers, you have 2 artists, and maybe you have a level designer versus your game designer, but that was it. And now it's, are you an artist? Well, are you a 3D artist, a 2D artist? Do you handle the lighting? Do you handle the models? Do you handle the rigging? Do you handle everything? Has gotten so specific at the big companies. Now, if you're doing indie development, you better have a very well-rounded, suite of abilities there, because you're going to have to do more. But as the industry has progressed, the jobs have gotten very, very specific.
When I started, the industry was globally worth about 14 billion, and it's pushing 180, 190 now. So when that much money starts to flow in any industry, you're going to see specialization. You're going to see business people take over a lot of the key roles, a lot of the decision making. The idea of mitigating risk is high on everyone's priorities now. You're going to start hearing stuff about KPIs and other metrics. And the thing is, like, all of that is important. It's all important. The industry does have to grow up at some point. And if we're, railing against the machine, all we're essentially saying is that we don't want to really take the time to look at where the industry is headed and where it's been and grow up. And, we can all be Toys R Us kids, I don't want to grow up, but at some point you got to start thinking, like, do I want to run a business or do I just want to make games? And I think it's really critical to understand that the bigger the team gets that you're either running or working with, you're going to have to start putting processes in place. You're going to have to start caring about the business side of it. And hyper specialization in the people you hire is something that you're just going to have to deal with. You're going to need more heads, and it's going to cost you more money.
The golden rule is you're not going to be able to continue to create making the games you want to create if you don't realize this is a business.
Oh yeah.
Because that's the end all be all. And that's why we preach so much. Do your competitive analysis. Make sure you're marketing from day one. Make sure, what you're doing has a place in the market. Because if you want to just make games as an art form and it's not going to be your primary, source of income, then for God's sake, go do it.
Do whatever you want. Yeah.
Yeah. But if you want to do this as your real job and your livelihood, you got to remember it's a business. At the end of the day, that's what it is, And so it's a hard truth for a lot of companies because they're like, I don't want to do that. I just want to make games.
And one of the last lessons I learned in running a studio is just the unimaginable importance of marketing. You can make the most beautiful game, but if nobody knows about it, then you might as well not have made it because, it's just not going to get out there. I spent 3 years working on what I think is one of the most fun games I've ever made. And, we even signed up with a publisher, unfortunately. So we thought, they'll handle all the marketing and all that. They did nothing. And when we finally released the game, it sold a whopping 8 copies. And my parents they probably bought 7 of those because nobody knew about the project,
Oh my God.
Yeah, so we scrambled to do some marketing after we'd released it. We sent it out to some places to review it. I mean, the game was reviewing on average between like 85 to 90 for the score, so it wasn't a bad game, but it's too little too late if you're waiting until after the game's done.
Can you say what the game was?
Yeah, it's called Majestic 12. It was like if you could imagine taking Contra and mixing it with Castle Crashers and making it 3D. It's up on Steam. It got greenlit, but we just never released it. We never re-released it on Steam. But it was such a fun game to play. It had local multiplayer. When we first made it, it had internet multiplayer, so you could play with 4 people. And it was a great game, but without the marketing, nobody bought it, which is a real shame, I think.
We got another question here from Kinder Dev on Twitch. What's up? I hate to derail, but any advice or opinions on Kickstarter or early access for indies?
No, that we never derail. We always stay 100% on topic on the show. We're not going to I can't even say that with a straight face. So what are your thoughts? I mean, I've got rules, and we can do a whole show on shit they don't tell you about Kickstarter. But I mean, have you ever done a Kickstarter or early access, Peter?
So the closest I came to doing a Kickstarter was with Robert Kirkman. Do you guys know about The Walking Dead? Have you seen that?
No, I've heard something about. Yeah.
So Robert, I met Robert a long time ago before he got into the TV and stuff, and I owned one of the licenses to his comic books called Battle Pope, and we were gonna set up a Kickstarter to kind of see if we could get the funds to make a game based off of that comic book. And for me, it never worked out. We never actually got to the point of launching the Kickstarter because there was just a lot of backlash happening at the time where, certain people were like, oh, this is begging for money, or, these games keep failing to deliver, so we're not going to actually, put any funds into this. And for me, I was like, I got some high profile clients on this end. I really don't want to bring any negative attention to all the things we're doing by potentially doing something with this big producer guy who it might not work out. The concern about Kickstarter is always you put yourself out there and people are like, no, we're not interested. Go away. And then you got to deal with that stigma of, I really stood up and people swatted me down. So for us, there was too many other people that kind of negativity could spill onto. So we're just like, forget it. We're not going to do this.
So Kickstarter, what they don't tell you, or what a lot of people do tell you and people don't listen, is you're not going to have a successful Kickstarter if you don't have a community already.
Exactly.
You can't go and go, oh, we'll find the community on Kickstarter. If you don't have this, then you're not gonna. It's not gonna happen. In a couple of weeks, we're gonna have the Tresay brothers on. And I frequently brag about them because they've done. It's 2 brothers and some contractors, and they've been putting out great games for years. Mm-hmm. But their Kickstarter for their next game is starting in February, but they've been promoting it since like September. and they've got a passionate community, and they can go along and do this, but you can't just go in and say, I've got a game idea and we've got a demo put together and we're going to just do a Kickstarter to get money, because it's not going to happen. It's too competitive. There's been too many people that have completely fucked up their projects and they've never launched, and there's a lot of Kickstarter angst out there. Early access is a different boat. Yeah. But early access, you have to market it. It's just like launching the game in some states. And, if you had asked me 2 years ago, I would have said, if you're going to do early access, just give up having a publisher, because no publisher is going to look at it, because they look at the early access and they're like, oh, well, you already launched. We missed our launch window. And it's like, no, we had to pay rent. But now that has changed, and there's a good chunk of publishers out there when we'll send them a project and they're like, how many wish lists does it have? Yeah. And they want to see, that's part of their whole risk mitigation. They want to know there's already a promotion behind it. There's already people that are interested in it. So, Kindred Dev, if you're making your game and you don't have several thousand people in your Discord already, I would, recommend going that early access route and then doing, some marketing to get behind it, and then going Kickstarter, because Kickstarter's just not going to fly if you don't have that community around you already.
Start your marketing now. I don't care how early your game is. If you're going to finish your game, start your marketing now.
Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Even if it's a year or two out.
What's that?
Even if it's a year or two out.
Yeah, it takes a long time to build a community. You're going to have to, post every week or two. You're going to have updates constantly. It's not, and they're going to trickle in. It's not like suddenly you put one post up and you get, 5,000 people like, oh, I got to play this now. Like there's this concept of the sales funnel. And like all this stuff you're doing by putting out screenshots and videos and movies is like the top rim of the funnel. You're just raising awareness about your project. And the bottom, is the sales aspect of it. But if you want to move people down, you got to at least get them aware of your project, and that takes time. There's no, I released a trailer and now everybody loves me. Unless you're magical, and it happens sometimes. Like this is like that survivor bias thing, right? They see one or two games that come out, their trailers are great, everybody loves them, suddenly they're kickstarted and the publishers are trying to woo them and all that kind of stuff, and they say, well, it must be easy, look, they did it. And they don't think about companies like Rovio that had 52 games before they released Angry Birds. 52. I haven't worked on 52 games in 20 years. So, like, you got to realize it's not that easy. You got to build your community.
Don't ask me to list them. There's no way. I got an invite from one of these new sites, and it's where you can go and post the work that you've done, and it shares information, and you can find contractors and all this other stuff. And I started my profile, and then I'm like, I can't remember a third of the games that I've been a part of at this point in time, because there's just absolutely so many of them. And so, yeah, it's
So I've got a completely off the rail question for both of you guys. What is the a game that you worked on that had like the craziest name, or was just like the weirdest thing that you worked on? I will tell you, I did animations for a game called Zombie Strippers Stole My Heart Then Ate My Brain, which was one of those Xbox Live 50-cent games, He's like, I'm a 3D animator also, but he paid me to do an hour animation walk cycle, and so that's what he got, was a walk cycle that took me an hour to make. But that's what he wanted, and the game was Zombie Strippers Stole My Heart Then Ate My Brain. It actually did pretty good, but...
So I've worked with DICE, I've worked with People Can Fly, I've worked with a lot of these studios who have done multi-million-dollar projects. One of the most surprising games that I ever was a part of that made just bucketfuls of money was called Horse and Pony Let's Ride. and it came out like 15 years ago. But and the funny thing, I was thinking about this the other day because there was a post on Reddit in the game dev or gaming or one of the genres, and it was somebody who went on a very well articulated, like 2-page rant about how there were no good horse games out there on the market. It is, if you want my free tip of the day, my here's me being the idea guy, make a new horse game. One that's legitimately real about doing dressage and jumping and all of this stuff, because the market out there is fucking huge. I mean, and nobody's turning around going, holy shit, let's make horse games. But that is actually a major market, and we made a ton of money on this thing, and then spent like another 3 or 4 years trying to find other horse games that we could work on. But it's one of those completely random things that you don't think about, but holy shit, we made a lot of money on that game.
For me, it was a game that would probably get me skinned alive if I was to work on it now. It was called Poacher, where you were...
Oh, man.
Yeah, it's exactly as bad as you think. So you basically, you had this guy, and you could go to the various, different biomes of the world and hunt endangered species.
Wow.
And, yeah. So you were shooting and like killing game wardens, and like your weapons would get progressively more crazy to the point where you're using like helicopters to like take down rhinos. So yeah, that I don't know what I was doing, but
oh my god, yeah,
that was probably the craziest project I've done.
Don't do porn games, but absolutely do games where you're hunting dangerous species.
But listen, this was a long time ago, so like if you've been paying attention to the media and just the zeitgeist of where we are now as a people, like what we're willing to accept and think about has changed quite a bit in the last 20, 30 years. It was okay then. That's all I'm saying.
And
I mean, you're just killing virtual animals, so who cares?
One
like
of the
they're real.
things that came through our evaluation stage years ago was a game where it was Tetris, but with naked bodies as the shapes, and when they matched up, they would actually have sex. And this
like move around.
Yes, there was it was animated, and it was one of those things that was like,
hey, I want to play this game now. Is it called Sexy Tetris? Hot?
I don't know what it was.
There's a bunch of different ones. Hot Tetris, topless Tetris.
It's still out there. I mean, but it was like, oh, okay. And then I think I've told this story on the podcast before, but it's still like hilarious to me. So we were working on a game called Ragdoll Kung Fu, and this is like in the midst of us changing the agency that I was at, 10 years ago or 10, 15 years ago into a publisher. So I believe we were actually publishing this one or co-publishing. I don't know. We were deeply involved, more so involved than we were as an agent, where we could go, oh, okay, our client did that. We had no idea. Don't blame us. We were literally at Goldmaster back when Goldmaster meant something, because we had to actually send a disc off to get replicated, not like, we had to upload it to Steam and we had a day one patch. And the whole thing was you basically controlled you were fighting in a 2D, like, beat 'em up scenario, but you would click and control the hand and it would move like a little rag doll or like a little paper doll. And a friend of ours came in. We were going to lunch one day. A friend of ours comes in and he's sitting there playing it. We're like, yeah, just play that for a little while and we'll be ready to go to lunch. And we hear him just like dying laughing out of the testing room, and we stuck at him and go, what is so funny about that game? He goes, oh, if you take the character's hand and you rub it on his crotch for like 30 seconds, he starts peeing everywhere. Oh my God. No one had tested it. No one had looked at that. I don't know how he had the idea to go ahead and, take his hand and rub it around his crotch for a little while, but it was a massive. Our boss like exploded, gets on the phone with the developer, and he's like, "This has got to be fixed." Developer's like, "I'm not fixing it," which we had already gone through Peggy and ESRB and all of this stuff where we have to disclose this stuff. Oh my God, it was absolutely, looking back, it was hilarious. At the moment, it was not hilarious, but it's one of those things. And another thing that no one tells you about is if you do have to go through ESRB and Peggy and all that sort of stuff, you can't have shit like that in there.
Yep.
That's not gonna help your case.
There was the hot coffee mod issue all those years ago, and there was a time where it was really, they were scrutinizing that kind of thing a lot too.
Well, so that literally, and the funny thing is it's been so long since the hot coffee thing happened, we have to actually explain what hot coffee was.
Right.
But, what was it, GTA 3? Mm-hmm. Is that the one it was in? So when they released GTA 3, of course it's console to start with, but then when they moved it and ported it over to PC, well, once it's on PC, people can get in and see all the little files and hidden crap that's in there. And somebody found a mini game that they had originally put in the game, and obviously somebody at Take-Two or Rockstar went, "Nah, shit, we can't do that." But it's like when you went on a date, you came home and you could ask your date if they wanted some hot coffee, and you would go in and have a sex mini game, and it was blatant nudity and sex, and it created such a this game was being sold in Walmart. I mean, Walmart's the one that raised the most hell about it. Right. But it literally created what we still call to this day the hot coffee clause in a contract. And before that, you would never have this clause, but now in every publishing contract you ever see, there will be a clause that says you will not put anything in this game that you have not told us about or disclosed, or nothing can be in it that violates all this blah, blah, blah. That clause didn't exist 15 years ago. That clause is there because somebody left the sex mini game in GTA 3.
Huge scandal. And it goes back to what you were saying at the beginning about, you can't necessarily have the porn cake and have your mainstream thing going together at the same time. So people are still sensitive about that kind of thing.
Before that, the biggest uproar, and this actually came from one of our clients. We weren't still working with them at the time, but they were a client of ours. They created the PlayStation port for Tiger Woods, whatever year it was, 1999. I don't know. It was way back when. But to fill up space on the disc, which is something you had to do when you sent things off, because God forbid you send a gold master off and somebody pays $60 for it and they look at the back of the CD or the DVD and the content only takes up like half the disc. That would be awful. But as space filler on there, they had dropped in the original pilot for South Park, the old Santa Claus versus Jesus fight, with the gay dog and all this other stuff, which at the time was ridiculously controversial. It's like people were upset that show was on TV in the first place, and here they went and bought an E-rated game for Tiger Woods golf, but if they dig into the files, here's an episode of South Park. That was like as bad as it had gotten before the hot coffee thing, took off. And so that's what hot coffee is for. And
this all ties into how the industry has changed in the last 20 years, So we used to have stuff like that. A lot of it gets mitigated in the contract state at this point. And a lot of people aren't really even trying to do that kind of thing anymore. It seems like developers have kind of matured to some degree with respect to these kind of things. There's a lot more.
Some of them have.
Some of them. I mean, I think we could stand to get a little bit more maturity in the industry in terms of the way people interrelate. Make it a safer place for women to get involved. Like every study I've ever seen shows that when men and women are working together, it's just like a much more productive environment. But we're not going to get women coming into this industry if everyone's dude broing around all the time. And it's just not even that fun. I don't need a dude bro. Enough, there's cooler things we can do. Especially as hard as it is these days to get a game made. You don't need to add an extra layer of difficulty on top of everything in your company culture.
Yeah, exactly. But
And
you know what?
Go ahead.
It's still, you know, and part of it is public perception. People still look at games as, you know, a gamer is a male 18 to 24. And that's not, I literally had this conversation,
Yeah.
you know, 5 minutes ago, well, not 5 minutes ago, 5 minutes before we went live with, you know, a client of ours. And he said, you know, my wife's not a gamer, but, and I went, okay, here we go. And, you know, he said she really likes, you know, these narrative games and the story-based stuff. And I said, you know what we call that, right? And he goes, no. I said, we call it a gamer.
Gamer, yeah.
It's still, you're still a gamer, you know, but there's so much of this mentality of it's still a boys club that it's ridiculous and it sucks. And you know, you have to get a good balance in there, or you know, it's just, the shit's never going to change.
There's that awful nuance of the terminology too, whether you're a gamer or someone who plays games. You know, because like when you think gamer, you immediately start getting this mental image in your head. Someone who plays games, you disassociate from that mental image almost immediately, and it's very strange.
It is, but it goes back to 30 years ago, and so it's getting better. You know, that's the good part. You know,
it is, but I kind of blame television and movies to some degree for creating this kind of this joke meme about what a gamer is. And for the longest time, I don't know if I still feel this way, but for the longest time, I felt that a lot due to jealousy on some part, because the gaming industry was pulling so many people away from television, movies, that kind of thing. And the reaction over on the other side of the entertainment industry was to kind of paint gaming as this kind of sad, you know, venture that people got involved in. And, you know, I can't think of anything more beautiful than art and science, you know, spinning around each other and forming the DNA of what is beautiful industry that, you know, we call games. And it's been run down by so many other industries. And whenever a politician needs to make a point,
oh my God,
you know,
yes.
the same politicians whose parents were telling them that rock and roll is going to get you all killed, believing in Satan. You know, like the same people are just now turning around and still to this day for the games industry.
Well, I mean, I see this as a parent, you know, and we'll be at school and somebody or the teacher or somebody will be ranting about screen time and how your kids shouldn't have screen time, you know, X amount of screen time. And I'm like, it's not the screen time that's the problem. It's what's on the screen that's the problem. You know, if I have a choice between, you know, my son watching YouTube for an hour or playing Minecraft for an hour, Minecraft, he's learning stuff. I hate to tell a lot of parents, but your kids are actually learning stuff when they play Fortnite. I mean, that's they're learning social skills, they're learning team building, they're learning problem solving. Now,
they're learning how to dab.
Yeah, they're learning how to dab and do dances. They are learning how to spend money on skins. But there are skills that come from this, but you know, no one wants to look at it because we still have that whole thing of, oh, gamers are all fat and lazy and greasy and stuck in the basement. Not the reality anymore. But you know,
it never was the reality.
Well, that's a good point too.
Yeah, I don't think it ever was. And that's the thing. A lot of game developers I've met who, you know, earlier we were talking about burnout and depression and all that. They've realized that if they don't get away from the development thing for a little while and go to the gym, work out, run, bike, you know, do jujitsu, whatever it is, they're not going to be able to stay sane working on games if they don't have some other outlet. And that's one of the most critical things I always tell people who are even thinking about getting into the industry as like an employee somewhere, whether they want to start their own business or not. You need to have some sort of physical outlet. You know, hit the gym every day. It's so important that you keep your physical and mental fitness up being involved in this industry. And to combat that idea of like fat, greasy gamer that never was, I think it's important that everyone who's working in this industry really take care of their physical and mental health for their own benefit.
Taking care of the physical is going to take care of the mental in some ways. I mean, because you have to have a break. And whether that break is, stepping away and walking laps or stepping away and even playing something outside of your genre. But yeah, that's what do they say? Sitting is the new smoking. And I know I'm bad about that too, because I don't have like a real commute anymore. I go outside and I go down the stairs and then I come into the office, but it's,
you're walking stairs. So that's something.
Well, that is true. That's true.
That's one of the most dangerous things too, is just the isolation that comes from, to get back on the topic of, I guess, starting an indie development company, is the isolation that comes from it. If you're just working out of your house every day and you're on Skype, or if you're on Discord with your team or whatever it is, you really need to get out there and socialize, man. Those skills atrophy. You're going to forget your deodorant at some point, man. You need to really get out there.
I'll stop buying it.
People talk to don't know how.
Wait, I don't even know. What is this shower thing that you talk about?
No.
Don't use Kappa in a conversation with a real life person.
But I mean, this is, again, we were talking about, the hard truths that come with starting your own business, or at least starting your own games business, is one you definitely start to lose your social skills if you don't get out there and have an outlet. Your physical health will decline if you don't find some way to, express yourself physically, whether it's through jujitsu or martial arts or going to the gym, running, whatever it is. And those are two really important things, but there's also other stuff to keep in mind, like when you're pitching your game and stuff, nobody cares about your story. Like that's a hard pill to swallow when you're first starting out, when you've come up with all of these amazing scenarios and characters, and the publisher or, the funding team is like, I don't give a shit. Not even a little. Flaxon from the planet Xanadu doesn't mean shit to me. You need to tell me, how many people are on your team, what's the budget, where are you going with this, what's the hook, all that stuff. And your story is not your hook.
We give away a publisher list through my consulting company. So we give away a publisher list that's got 650 some publishers on it. You can just go to thepowellgroupconsulting.com/publisher-list and download it. Now, as a, follow up on that, we do a webinar that says, okay, you got this list of publishers. Here's how you go and, actually find one for your game. And part of it is when we go through, and I'm going through that webinar, we go through the 10 slides that you need to have in your deck. Don't send some publisher a 30 deck slide. Here's the 10 slides that you need. And that is exactly one of the slides. And it's, I always pull up, when we're doing the webinar, I pull up Fallout 4. On the Steam page. It's like, we all know the Fallout stories have this gigantic, deep lore. I mean, to the point that people argue over the lore of something that has now been handed through like 4 different development studios. And we're not talking about, you can't keep all that shit straight. But anyway, I'm like, look, they said in like 3 sentences what the story is about and what this background of it is. Don't put 4 slides of your deck being about the lore of your character, and because nobody gives a shit. It's tell us the setting and tell us like a sentence about why your character is doing what they're doing. And that's it.
Why is your game interesting? Yeah. I actually downloaded your list of publishers, because just last week we actually started pitching the current game that we're working on right now. So I downloaded your list, and we have our deck put together, and there's just certain things that you have to hit on. The game we're working on is called Tech vs. Magic, so that immediately lets you know what the project is about. So we have that key art on our first slide and kind of explain right at the right on the first thing, this is what the game is. It's a multiplayer first-person shooter where you've got technology on one side and magical creatures and sorcerers and crap on the other. So like you need to get right to the point about what your product is. Like there's an interesting hook there, and if a publisher or a funding source can look at that first page and be like, I understand, you've already won half the battle right there. If they can just understand your product quickly.
So how's that game balance thing going between the M1 Abrams and the Dragons right now?
I've had to nerf the Dragons repeatedly. Like they're melting everything. The testers keep playing the game. But like, is there any reason for us to be on the tech side? Like, I've shot this dragon 400 times in the forehead, and it's still okay. So yeah, we've been nerfing the Dragons quite a bit. But yeah, I don't know. It's that's one of the things you end up dealing with towards the end of the project, or if you're smart all throughout, is just kind of keeping the balance going with your units and stuff like that.
All right, so we're running short on time, and we're going to have to do this again because this is very therapeutic, if nothing else. But so I just posted the links, and we'll drop them in the various channels when we put the posts up. But you can get that list at powellgroupconsulting.com/publisher-list. But you can find us and Peter and all the other guests that we have on there for that Discord link is busted, is it? No, it works. Oh wait, no it doesn't. I'll figure that out. Oh, it should be indie game business. My bad.
Yeah. I'll type it.
Okay. So yeah, go to discord.gg/indie game business. That's where we are on Discord. But so I'm going to throw one more question out here, and I'm sitting here watching Twitter, and Rami Ismail just threw this out there. He says,
I met Rami at GDC like a year or two ago. I was talking to him right after. Yeah, he's a great guy. Really nice guy.
So he said, can we please agree that delay can absolutely mean, quote, more crunch and that it's bad, but let's not blanket stigmatize delay to the point where it gets assumed to be bad again. We just got to the point where game studios feel they can delay a game to relieve pressure on their teams. Yes, I agree that, being delayed isn't a bad thing anymore, but if that delay does mean that your studio just went from like 3 weeks of crunch to 3 months of crunch, that's bad. So how do you deal with crunch? What have you seen? What do you do now that's different? How do you approach crunch with your studio?
We don't crunch.
That is the answer from a mature development studio.
Yeah, and guess what? We all try to sleep, 8 hours a night if we can too. All this nonsense bravado about I got 2 hours of sleep and I crunched for 3 million hours this week. You can go on with that shit. Nobody needs it. like, oh Lord, he coming. No, we don't need any of that nonsense. Like,
it's not a good thing.
Get your gym time in. Don't crunch. Live a life, man. You're going to wake up 20 years down the line and be like, where the hell did it all go? I spent it in a room sitting in a chair. It's not going to work for you.
It is not a badge of honor to sit around and talk the fact that you worked on it. And what was the guy from Rockstar that was like bragging about that shit after, Red Dead came out? He's like, our teams worked 100 to 120 hours a week. Ha ha ha. It's like, that's stupid.
Not anything to be proud of.
Yeah, what they don't tell you is that the whole team quit afterwards because they couldn't take it anymore.
Well, and here's the other reality that they're not going to tell you about, being in game development. You're going to sit there, and when you're working at one of these studios and you're going to work 100, 120 hours a week, and you're going to be sitting there going, oh yeah, I'm paying my dues. Bullshit. You know what's going to happen? They're going to work you like that. And then when the game comes out, you're going to get your ass laid off.
Yeah.
Because that is exactly what happens at these studios. Watch every single time a big AAA title gets launched, a batch of people gets laid off from that studio. And I guarantee
the first studio I worked at, they called us in on a Monday. They said, we've made $6 million, X million dollars on this project. On Wednesday, they laid off a third of the company after telling us, everything's awesome. We're great. We're doing wonderful. Like you think the loyalty you're giving up is going to be given back down.
There is no loyalty.
There is
Our
none.
grandparents had loyalty to companies.
Yeah.
There is none now. And I don't feel bad. I own a company. I don't feel bad about saying that because you have all of these studios and all of these companies that do shit exactly like that. Or they put out, Activision got called out on it, last quarter or 2 quarters ago, because they came out with their earnings report and said how many billions of dollars they made, and then they laid off 600 people.
Wasn't it 800? Was it 600?
It was something ridiculous. I mean, it was absolutely crazy. You don't go into any company with the fallacy that they're going to be loyal to you, because they're not. You are a commodity to these big studios. Indie devs, it's different.
It is.
Especially if, you've got an indie studio that has been around and they've done things and they know how to ship a product effectively and that sort of stuff. But you can't sit there and go, I'm going to work all these hours because it's going to move, it's going to be wonderful for my career. You're still going to get laid off. Whether you're working, 80 hours a week, 60 hours a week, 40 hours a week, or 120 hours a week. At the end of the day, if they have a bad stock day, or if they change their leadership, or if they ship the project and they don't need you anymore, you're gone. You're going to get laid off. It's absolutely one of the things that drives me nuts, seeing these younger developers and they're like, I put in all these hours. It's like, unless you did that for your own game, which you shouldn't do anyway. I mean, you should be spending an appropriate amount of time in the office and at home, but it's
or your home office.
Or your home office, it's absolutely crazy. It's ridiculous and stupid. And crunch.
There are some studios that have kind of retained the I guess decent culture as they've gotten a bit bigger too, and those are phenomenal places to work, I think. So it's not like everyone gets evil the second they hit like a certain head count at their studio. One of the things I didn't know, I know we're running short on time. One of the things I didn't know when I first started working in this industry, I'd come into this new studio and be like, why are they doing this way? This is so dumb. Why are they doing that way? There's just so much stuff that you don't know that's going on that might affect whether you're employed or not at the end of a project, that it's not necessarily like everyone's not looking to just use you and abuse you and then toss you aside. Sometimes, business matters get in the way that cause that, but you need to be prepared for it regardless of what the intentions of the people who are running the company are. So there's just sometimes that they can't help but lay people off. So you just need to be aware that it's a big possibility in this industry.
There's no job security in this industry.
There's no job security anywhere though. Like these days, like it just feels like there's no job security at all. I think it's a myth. That's why I chose to be a contractor. Like I know at the end of every, like you get, instead of getting fired once, you get fired every time you're done. I mean, they'll re-up on the next project, but in the meantime, you're done.
They will, but that's why you have to always be doing your BD too, because you don't know. You've always got to have a backup plan.
And speaking of BD, I think everyone should go on Steam and search for Tech vs. Magic and wishlist it.
Yes, please do, and play as the dragons because they're so ridiculous OP right now that it's crazy. All right, we are well over our time, and this has been ridiculously fun. Hold on, I'm digging up the URL for your game.
If anyone sees me at GDC, come over and say hi. It's always fun to meet other indies and new developers and stuff.
Are you going to have a booth?
No, I'm just going to... I've done that before. I've had a booth at GDC a few times, but for now, it's just really going and enjoying the show and catching up with friends and seeing what kind of new tech is out there and stuff like that.
And dropping $5 or $10,000 to live in San Francisco for a week.
Yeah, well, one thing I think people should know about that. I know we're almost done here, but the business does not happen at the show, and I think that's something we should discuss next time, for sure. Well, E3, GDC.
All right, so we'll circle back after all this is done and figure out when that next time's going to be, because we need to do it. But for now, everybody, thank you Thank you for listening. And if you enjoy what we're doing, give us a subscribe, a like, or a follow wherever you're listening to us to help us spread the word. We're on Facebook, we're on Twitch, Twitter,
Anchor.fm/indie-game-business.
What else? Facebook, Mixer. Just search Indie Game Business. You'll find us. But tell a friend and give us some loving on there.
Some lovins.
Appreciate it.
Friday lovins.
All right, Peter. Thank you. This is awesome. I love this.
Thank you very much for having me. This was a wonderful time.
Thanks as always, Indy, as well.
It's a great stream. Thank you guys. Bye.
Y'all have a good weekend.
Have a great weekend.